Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. My name is Joe Devine and today I'm joined firstly by Seb Stafford-Bloor. Hello Seb.
Hi Joe.
How are you?
I'm in isolation, so I'm getting a bit weird. I mean,
yes.
It's different. It's really strange, and especially if you're writing about something. Well, my job is now to write about something and to talk about something which doesn't technically exist. So
yes,
yeah, psychologically, who knows where I'm headed for? Yeah.
Well, we'll find out in July when you're still inside. Anyway, Seb and I were joined by Liam Twomey of The Athletic today to talk all about Chelsea. This was a really fun one. I really enjoyed this. I'm very grateful to Liam for coming. What a knowledgeable guy, hey?
Yeah, he's super knowledgeable. Nice bloke as well. I've shared press boxes with Liam, and he's a nice guy. So it's good to finally have him on.
Absolutely. So what we talked about was, is the club for sale? How has Lampard managed without the summer transfer window? In fact, has it worked in his favour, which was interesting? Who's likely on the radar in terms of incoming players, or more likely positions that will be targeted? A little bit about Petr Cech's evolving role, a little bit about the finances. There was loads of stuff. I'm going to say that my favourite moment of this podcast, Seb, was when Liam said that the academy staff are delighted that some players are finally being used, because I'd never considered them before. I'd always thought, was it related to Chelsea, about the players who must be disappointed, young players going there thinking there is no route to the first team. I'd never considered that there were men and women working tirelessly over the last 10 years to create exceptional footballers who never ever played for the first team. That must have been heartbreaking.
All for the aim of equipping Vitesse or someone in the Football League. Actually, my favourite bit was a little chat about the recruiting structure. I thought that was interesting. Liam, because it's been quite vague. I mean, Chelsea's recruiting has been quite a nebulous process for quite some time. So he really added some clarity there.
I feel like this one really lives up to its name of what's going on at, or everything you need to know about Chelsea.
What might be going on at Chelsea were the football to be actually happening.
Yes, exactly.
Let's call it that. That's very catchy for YouTube.
This episode of the podcast is supported by The Athletic, the best place to read about football online, and also the home of Liam Twomey, so I'm sure you'll be checking it out after listening to today's episode. If you visit theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, you can get a 7-day free trial and 50% off an annual subscription that works out at £2.50 per month or so. Anyway, that's enough from Seb and I for now. Here you are with Liam Twomey. Liam, is Chelsea for sale? Because I hear that it is.
Well, I've not heard anything to say categorically that Chelsea's for sale. And certainly if you ask anyone at the club, the line has never changed over the last 18 months to 2 years. The response you get back is always that Abramovich is as committed as he's ever been. Any approaches for the club have been fairly swiftly rebuffed, and he's not looking to sell. Now you can read into that what you want, but that is the response. And the way I always look at this when it comes to judging Abramovich's commitment to Chelsea is that you have to judge him by actions. You can't judge him by words because there aren't any. He never talks.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But you can judge him by the different actions that he's taken over the last sort of year or so, and I think there's two main aspects to that. One is the campaign against anti-Semitism that Chelsea have launched, which is really kind of unique, I think, among sports clubs all over the world, never mind just football, in terms of the extent and the resources that they have poured into that campaign. And that is something that's personally very important to Abramovich. So the fact that he is now using Chelsea as a platform for that, I think has made owning Chelsea more important to him than perhaps it's ever been, because football is, as we're finding out in these times, relatively trivial, and there are a lot of things more important, and he is using this to kind of send a message to the wider world about something that is very personally relevant to him. And the other aspect is that if you look at Chelsea's last financial accounts, Abramovich poured £247 million of his personal wealth into the club last year in what would otherwise have been a very heavily loss-making year, or they wouldn't have been able to spend as much as they did in the transfer market. So I don't think you you pour that much money into a club in the space of 12 months if you are not still committed. Now, whether he has a price is another question, but that's not something I've heard categorically.
That's interesting. I spoke to Murad Ahmed from Financial Times for a podcast last week, and he said, well, we were talking about a story that he wrote on Jim Ratcliffe, who's this British billionaire who owns a company, I think they're called Ionis or something.
Ineos,
that's the one, yes. For some reason, I can't ever say that name. But one of the things he said, and I suppose this is more sort of towards your second definition of whether the club is available or not, does he have a price? Jim Ratcliffe claims that every top six club is for sale for the right price. Presumably that's just in the way that every company is for sale for the right price, rather than it being specific to Chelsea, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is capitalism, isn't it?
Sure.
I think if you throw enough money at anything, I think you can make someone think about selling.
Right. Okay.
But it's so difficult to, you're talking about seeing into the mind of Abramovich, and this is maybe the most reclusive owner of any sports club in the world.
Yeah.
Though maybe Stan Kroenke could give him a run for his money, but yeah, it's so difficult to know what Abramovich is thinking, which is why I often default to judging him by his actions. But I think with specifically Ratcliffe, he has since bought Nice, hasn't he?
Yeah.
In France, and I think there was a sense that he looked at Chelsea.
I think he went to the club and looked around.
When I made inquiry. Sorry?
Apparently he went to the club and looked around and was sort of taken round.
Well, I think the impression I got from that was that he was at one point owner of a corporate box, I think, at Chelsea. He was kind of like in the VIP bracket of people who attended games, and one of the perks of that was that you could get a tour of Cobham. It wasn't as if he was shown around Cobham as the prospective new owner of Chelsea.
Oh, that's interesting.
He was shown around as a VIP. So I think those two events, him bidding for the club and him being shown around the training ground, were not necessarily linked. And I think there was a fair bit of time between the two. But he certainly showed an interest and made an inquiry. My understanding is that inquiry never got beyond an initial kind of, would this be a possibility? The answer came back, no. They never got round to discussing figures, as far as I'm aware.
Right, okay.
And I'm not aware of any conversation about Chelsea that has gotten as far as Abramovich stating an asking price. I think whenever you see an asking price for Chelsea, it's people around the club, or maybe around money circles, making an estimate of what they think would make Abramovich think.
Right. And so the rumours about this really just come from Abramovich having his visa taken away, and around the same time that he became an Israeli citizen, no longer able to work in the UK. Do the rumours just come from there?
Well, I mean, I think the noise isn't coming from nowhere, is it? I mean, you have to ask why there are such a constant stream of stories suggesting that people are interested. And I think maybe there is an element of people seeing what Abramovich's situation is in terms of the standoff with the UK government, the issues he's had with his visa, and thinking there is an opening there. Whether there actually is one or not is another question, but that perception can be reality. And I think if people with the funds to buy Chelsea perceive it to be available, then they're going to make those inquiries and try to begin those conversations. Abramovich has not been to Chelsea, but he has still been involved. Whenever they've played abroad, he was in Baku for the Europa League final. He was in Boston for the game against anti-Semitism. He was, I believe, in Nice for pre-season last year, and he also met the Chelsea women's team in Israel. So when they have not been on UK soil, he has still been present. And my understanding is that the people at the club who report directly to him, among them Marina Granovskaya, are in daily contact with him about the running of the club. They don't necessarily run every decision by him, because he delegates a lot more than he used to, but he still does take an active interest.
Liam, how much effect has the changes with the stadium plans had on this? I mean, am I right in thinking that the original planning permission is about to expire either very, very soon, or maybe it just has?
Yeah, so the planning permission expires on March 31st, and Chelsea released a statement this week saying that they were going to allow that deadline to pass without action. That's been pretty clear for some time, to be honest. Simon Johnson and I wrote a piece a couple of months ago, kind of a state of play look at Chelsea's stadium project, and it was already clear at that point that it was on indefinite hold. It has been ever since they released that very short statement in response to the UK government. Very short and very
vague statement.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, unfavourable investment climate.
Yeah, it could mean literally anything at all, that, couldn't it?
It could, and I think there was kind of a dual meaning to it, because I think part of it was that Abramovich was seeking external funding for the stadium project, because the Stamford Bridge redevelopment had spiralled in terms of costs. It was initially expected to be about £500 million, and costs, if reports were to be believed, had gone up towards £1 billion, which would make it the most expensive stadium project, maybe even more expensive than Wembley. So Abramovich wasn't going to finance that all from his own pocket. He was looking for external funding, and so that I think is maybe part of the unfavourable investment climate, particularly post-Brexit. I got a sense from the club that the uncertainty caused by the Brexit vote had an impact, I think, on their ability to secure funding on the kind of terms they were looking for. And also, unfavourable investment climate can also be read as, I'm not financing a £1 billion construction project that I can't visit. And that's certainly part of this.
Which is quite a reasonable position, actually, isn't it?
That's certainly part of this. I think Abramovich is very annoyed still, and you still get that sense when you talk to people who report to him at Chelsea, that he's very annoyed at everything that's happened with the UK government. He feels he's been made a kind of scapegoat.
Can you explain that to listeners who may not have followed the story to this point, Liam? I mean, it came around after suspiciously close to the situation with the Salisbury attack last year, right?
Yes. Yeah, so Theresa May was still Prime Minister. The Salisbury attack happens, and I think the UK government it's so strange as a Chelsea reporter to have to look into these events and have these influence your worldview. But yeah, so the UK government, I think, announced steps to reassess who was given Tier 1 investor visas. So the Tier 1 investor visa, you have to reapply every 5 years, and that's what Abramovich has been doing ever since he bought Chelsea, and investing in the UK economy. It's never been a problem for him, but in the wake of Salisbury and the kind of chilling of relations between the UK government and the Russian government, the UK government signalled that they were going to get tough on who was granted these investor visas, that they were talking about demanding evidence of where the person's money has come from, and different requirements. And it was made pretty clear that, as far as I understand it was made pretty clear behind the scenes that Abramovich would probably not be given one. As it wasn't formally rejected, they were just delaying, and then Abramovich withdrew the application, and he has not reapplied since. I think there's been a chilling effect on both sides. I think Abramovich is not going to reapply, and as far as I'm aware, and the UK government, their position, I don't think has necessarily changed. And in the meantime, Abramovich got Israeli citizenship, which means he can actually visit the UK on his Israeli passport. But the UK government also briefed that anyone who does that cannot do any work during their visit. Now, what is classed as work is visiting Stamford Bridge, the club you own? Is that considered work? I think there's a lot of grey area there, and it's all a big political mess, and I think that's why we haven't seen Abramovich in the UK since all of it happened.
It's a really interesting story, and it becomes sort of even more interesting when you consider, as you said already, Liam, that he's actually spent £247 million of his own money in the last year or the year before last, I said 2018, on Chelsea, much of which has gone on transfers, presumably. Can I start by asking you how this is going to impact financial fair play? Because I believe it was £101.8 million loss, and that was the biggest since 2005, which also included Courtois' sale, so it would have been much bigger without that. What's the impact on FFP of a loss that size at the moment?
Yeah, so we know that the requirements for FFP is that in any sort of rolling 3-year monitoring period, you can't lose more than £30 million over that time. So Chelsea posted a fairly big loss last year, but they did post 2 fairly significant profits before that. So they are still in a decent position, and also they banked, I think they'd already banked 115.4 million from player sales for next year's accounts, and that includes the Hazard sale to Real Madrid. So that isn't in the accounts we're talking about. Then you add the fact that they are back in the Champions League, which is another thing that made a huge difference to those accounts. Chelsea won the Europa League, and it still didn't even come close to replicating the income that they'd had from reaching the round of 16 under Antonio Conte of the Champions League the year before. That's just the difference between those two competitions. So it wasn't ideal for Chelsea, certainly, and without Abramovich's investment, they either would have recorded a much bigger loss, or they just couldn't have gone out and signed Kepa and Jorginho and some of the other big deals they did. So there would have been a reassessment. But my understanding is that, and this is all with the caveat of we don't know how this shutdown is going to affect everything. Will UEFA suspend FFP? Will we see a massive global slowdown of the transfer market? But before all of this happened, Chelsea were in a pretty good position, provided they got top 4 this year, to go out and spend pretty big. And I think they were looking at targeted positions, because they have a core now of young players that they are happy to build around, that they are now confident are going to be a big part of Chelsea for the next 5 to 10 years. And now it's quality rather than quantity around those. So they were confident they would have the funds to do that, and they were confident they would have the means to do that.
Liam, so this season, obviously, we've seen the breakthrough of a kind of a little cabal of Chelsea players from the academy. Is there a level beneath players like Reece James and Billy Gilmore, players who are kind of marked for progression either next season or the one after? Yeah,
so I think you've seen a couple of them get scattered minutes this season in the cup competitions. I mean, you've got Armando Broja, the striker, who came on against Everton. Tino Angerin as well. I think he's probably the biggest hope in the current development squad.
Was Angerin the one that tried a 35-yard volley with his first touch in the Premier League?
Yeah, which I massively appreciate.
No, you've absolutely got to do that. If that chance exists, you've got to take it.
You only get one Premier League debut, right? So shoot your shot. You could be a hero forever. You could start your Premier League career like Danny Rose. That would be incredible. So everyone's very excited about Angerin. He's been compared a little bit to Loftus-Cheek, which I understand in some ways, given how physically developed he is for his age. But they're also very different players. He's much more of a number 10 winger type, very skillful, very good at one-on-one. And you also have Ian Maatsen, the Dutch left-back, who just signed a new contract, who I think Chelsea are looking at as maybe backing up whoever the left-back is next year, because I don't think they regard Alonso or Emerson as long-term solutions in that position.
No.
And then you look at some of the youngsters out on loan as well. I mean, Ethan Ampadu's had a tough year in Germany, but if you ask him, he says he's learned a lot, even when he's not been playing under Julian Nagelsmann. And you also have Conor Gallagher, who's been tearing it up in the Championship for 2 different clubs now. So Lampard is going to have some big decisions to make ahead of next season, because I think it's impossible for him to give all of these players the development opportunities they need, and B, keep them all happy. But these are problems that Chelsea would have killed to have even 2 years ago. You know, that the idea that they've got so many players coming through from the academy that they've actually got too many, and they've got to make tough decisions is a world away from where they were when they were having to sign the likes of Danny Drinkwater to fill a homegrown quota. So it's a good position for them to be in, and I think they recognise that Lampard and Jody Morris, Joe Edwards, the work they've done this year has saved the club millions in the long term.
Yeah. Can I just you mentioned Marcos Alonso at the beginning of that. Can I ask what actually happened with him? Because I remember being in a Maurizio Sarri press conference right at the beginning of his time at the club, beginning of last season, and he talked of Alonso as, I kind of favourably, as the best left back in European football, which was probably not quite true. But even so, his standing was very high at Stamford Bridge. What happened between now and then, where he seemed to drift out of the side, but also become almost a persona non grata at some point during last season?
Well, I think the best analogy to Marcos Alonso is that as a left back he's Clark Kent, and as a left wing back he's Superman. He's a really, really unusual player. I've never seen a player like him. I think in that wing back system that Conte introduced in the title winning season, he's such a unique weapon because he's technically absolutely exquisite. You know, he's maybe got the best technique at Chelsea with that left foot, especially in terms of striking the ball. And he's also got the instincts of a striker in the final third in terms of his anticipation, his movement. I was struck by his second goal against Bournemouth.
I was at that game too. It was a real centre-forwards finish, wasn't it? Just to be in that position,
really was.
To take the chance. Yeah, absolutely.
He actually reminds me a little bit of, if you were to reimagine Frank Lampard as a wing back, it would be Marcos Alonso. You know, not the fastest, but keeps himself in good condition, good stamina to get up and down, and in the final third just finds a way to get the ball into the net from all angles, and that makes him a really valuable player. But on the other side of it, if you're not going to play a wing back system, he's not tactically positioned. You know, he's not positionally good enough to defend his own spot without the cover of another centre-back patrolling the space behind him. And he's also physically too limited in terms of his lack of speed to be able to keep up with the kind of wingers that you regularly see in the Premier League in particular. And that makes him a difficult player to build around. If you're not playing wing-backs, it's hard to see how he fits in. And at the same time, he signed a new long-term contract at Chelsea in the Sarri season, which has him on a six-figure weekly wage, which, if he's not going to be your first choice in that position, isn't really tenable.
Just a quick interruption in today's episode for me to remind you that we are supported by The Athletic, the best place to read about football online. If you visit theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, you can get a 7-day free trial to read things such as Unwritten, Europe's Golden Boot, The Pain, The Drama, and The Glory. Seb?
Yeah, it's great. It's by Adam Hurrey, this Football Cliches on Twitter. He basically investigates all the old anomalies which used to take place with anointing a top scorer from the continent, because obviously you'd have your Alan Shearers and your original Ronaldos rattling in the goals in sort of elite leagues, and then every now and again you get somebody in Romania who scored sort of 40 in 13 games somehow, and that's a bit of a can of worms, because it opens a conversation about things like match fixing and influence and trying to create notoriety for the league by unfair means. And Adam's done a really good piece on it, really entertaining, good fun.
Well, that's available on The Athletic. That is theathletic.co.uk/Tifo. You can use your 7-day trial to read that and as many things as you can read in 7 days. And if you enjoy them, you can take 50% off your annual subscription, which works out to be about £2.50 a month. Hey, in the current climate, what better thing to do than sit at home and read about football and dream that it was happening again and try not to cry? Anyway, back to today's episode. There's a few players who are in that situation, I think, aren't there? I mean, I was going to ask you, you mentioned that Chelsea are in the position to spend big in the summer if they so choose. If that's the case, that's fantastic. But at the same time, the wage bill, it reads in one of your recent articles with Matt Slater, is at 63.9%, or at least it was before Hazard left. So it's probably adjusted a little bit now. But you mentioned Alonso there. There's also Barkley and Giroud who are mentioned in the piece, as well as players who are earning six-figure salaries and not really playing in the first team. So in the summer, do they let these guys walk away? Do they let Pedro walk away, for example? Or I know there's been some discussion about Willian as well. Is that how they free up space within the wage bill? And presuming that is the case, which positions are they thinking about targeting in the summer?
Sure, yeah. So I think there's going to be some correction to the wage bill on that end. I mean, Willian, Pedro and Giroud are all free agents. I don't particularly expect any of them to come back. Willian is looking for a 3-year contract, which I don't think he has a hope in hell of getting out of Chelsea, given their track record with players over the age of 30. Mm. That's why those talks have been at a standstill for months, and I don't see any development there. But, you look at the likes of Barkley and Alonso, I think both could be sold, because I think there would be a market for both of them. Barkley's an England international in his prime. Chelsea wouldn't actually have to sell him for that much to make a tidy profit on him, because they only paid £15 million for him. You look at someone like Marcos Alonso, I think Antonio Conte would love him back at Inter. So that's certainly an option there. But the other side to the wage bill is also that the young players that you've brought in this season, a lot of them are properly paid now. Callum Hudson-Odoi is now earning six figures. You've Mason Mount, Reece James, Fikayo Tomori, all these guys have signed new contracts this season. And while they may not be on that sort of money, they're certainly on your standard Chelsea first team wage, I think, at this point. And Tammy Abraham is still holding out because he wants parity at least with Hudson-Odoi, which, given what he's done this season, you would think he has a case to ask for. So the wage bill is going to continue to be a little bit of a balancing act, and in some ways that's probably a concern that Chelsea should be more mindful of, rather than simply transfer fees. Everyone always talks about, they've got 200 million, 300 million to spend, and it's usually a fundamental misunderstanding of the way clubs budget themselves for transfer windows. Wages are the most important expense, not transfer fees.
Right, yeah. And can I say that actually thinking about it this summer, I mean, we caveat this by saying we're really not sure what's going to happen with the transfer window. But were it to go ahead as normal, let's assume, I think all of the top 6 clubs are in a position where they are likely to spend big this summer, or might have been otherwise. I mean, for example, it's been made clear that Manchester United have already sort of spent some of their Pogba money on Fernandes in expectation of selling him in the summer, but are likely to spend bigger as well. Manchester City have just lost the league, quite amazingly, so they'll probably spend some money. Even with Liverpool, who are a smart recruiting club and have done incredible recruitment work over the last few years, it seems that the only real step into the market they would make this summer would be for a big marquee purchase to improve one of their already incredible positions. And you can see the same even with Tottenham. Mourinho is there. It's likely that he will want to bring some players. And do you think Chelsea are going to face pretty big and stiff competition the next time a window opens?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly when you're talking about players like Jadon Sancho. I think in the modern transfer market, there aren't really any undiscovered gems. All of these clubs have global recruitment networks. They're all watching everyone all the time. And a lot of them end up chasing the same players. And Sancho will be an exceptional case even by those standards, because every major European club will want him. He will have his pick. But even some of the lesser targets or some of the less glamorous targets, it's very feasible that most of the players Chelsea go for, they will be competing against at least one of United, Liverpool, City. I mean, they beat City to Jorginho, didn't they, in the summer of 2018? So that's certainly going to be part of it. And I think that's also why you've seen Chelsea make an early signal that they wanted to be really proactive this summer with the signing of Hakim Ziyech. There was a lot of surprise around Europe with different clubs around Europe about how quickly Chelsea moved on that deal ahead of the summer, because that's not something English clubs traditionally do. English clubs have a reputation in Europe of being very reactionary, not really planning super ahead and then paying massively over the odds once the summer rolls around. Whereas other clubs actually, think ahead of time, and you regularly see like Bayern Munich get 4 or 5 deals in the can by May almost.
Right.
So Ziyech I think impressed a lot of people with the way Chelsea did that deal, and I think they are looking to be very proactive elsewhere, although with this shutdown, who knows when clubs will be able to buy players and how much they'll be willing to spend once they do.
Liam, can we talk about Ziyech for just a minute? I still don't really feel like I know what he is. I mean, because I haven't seen enough of him in what I term a proper context. Like I've seen,
he's a bundle of fun, Seb. That's what he is.
He's undisputably a bundle of fun, and he is, for as long as football exists, that little video clip of him pinging a 50-yard ball across the pitch will be on Twitter. But who do you think is going to be the victim at Chelsea who ends up missing out on the side to accommodate Ziyech? Because I don't see where his I don't see him quite as a natural wide forward. I certainly wouldn't be positioning him there ahead of someone like Hudson-Odoi or Mount. Is he going to be one of a midfield 3 at Stamford Bridge?
Well, I think the two positions he's excelled in for Ajax over the last 2 or 3 years have been either on the right of a front 3, but it's almost been like a 4-3-2-1, hasn't it? As one of the creators behind.
I'd also worry about the different levels of sort of defensive obligation that he would face in the Premier League as well, because I don't know how good a defender he actually is. In that,
yeah, well, I mean, by all accounts, his work rate has spiked in the last 2 or 3 years, and that has answered one of the big questions that a lot of scouts had about him, is how hard he's willing to run, how much ground he's willing to cover. So that I don't necessarily have any doubts about that, but where a lot of European clubs did have doubts about Ziyech, where I think Chelsea were maybe less concerned than most, is his physique. He's a very lean player, not necessarily super imposing, and you are going to the most physically intense league in the world. I think that is the big question about Ziyech, into how does he handle the kind of physicality that Eden Hazard had to deal with on a weekly basis. Yeah. It's very feasible that Ziyech could come in and immediately be in the top 5 most fouled players in the league, just because of the type of player that he is. He's going to be the type of player that defenders want to kick because of the things that he does. So how he reacts to that is going to be, I think, a big determining factor in his success. But in terms of where he slots into the team, I think what he does is he gives Chelsea creation in more positions and a bit more options to play a different way. So he can play as a 10 in a 4-2-3-1. He did that at Stamford Bridge in the 4-4 to great effect, especially when he was drifting over to the right-hand side from that position and creating overloads. Or he can play off the right and cut inside and deliver those kinds of crosses. And I think that's one of the things that Chelsea really are looking for is that quality of ball in the final third, because there have been a lot of games this season where they've been funneled out wide. And their crossing hasn't quite been up to snuff, and Reece James has helped address that a little bit, because he's an excellent crosser of the ball. But I think what you could see next season is that Ziyech and James, in theory, dovetail really well, because you would have the threat of Ziyech cutting in on his left foot to swing in an in-swinger, or James overlapping and picking you apart the other way. And I think they're looking for a way to stretch teams.
How does that's interesting, because actually that pretty much describes every game I've seen at Stamford Bridge this season, is a kind of Chelsea being funneled into those wide positions and an opposition just banking on the delivery not being good enough. So if you accommodate Ziyech that far forward, how are you adjusting around him? Like what becomes this kind of feeds into Joe's question about what the transfer priorities are in the summer, but what becomes the midfield 3 behind it? Presumably Mount is in there, Kante's in there, Kovacic maybe, question mark.
Well, this goes to I would actually have Kovacic as a definite. I think he's really improved. I think he's been arguably Chelsea's best player this season, Kovacic. Yeah. He's been absolutely superb. And actually what this season has done, and we haven't heard too much from inside Chelsea to suggest this is something they're heavily considering, but both Simon and I think that Chelsea really should be asking themselves this summer whether they should sell N'Golo Kante. He's just turned 29. He's missed 50% of the games this year.
Yeah.
He's a guy who's been so durable, and this has been by far the most injury hit season of his entire career. This could be the right time to sell. He's the highest paid player in the squad.
What an emotional moment though, hey?
It would be. I mean, he's a lovely guy. He's a great player. He's Chelsea's only, undisputed world-class player. But he's not necessarily a brilliant fit for the direction in which Chelsea are going. You saw last season under Sarri that it was a bit of an awkward marriage in terms of style. His best qualities are less valuable to a team that has the ball most of the time. And Lampard has actually continued largely in the way that Sarri wanted to try and play. And because of that, Kante has still been on the right of a midfield three. He's still been kind of playing a little bit further forward than you would maybe want him to ideally. He's been tasked with a little bit more offensive responsibility than maybe he should be. And it's not been the ideal fit. So I think this could be a good time to sell, but
it's interesting how that also hasn't been the story. I mean, that was like the lead of the narrative around Sarri not working out at Chelsea was the situation with Kante, true or false. Under Lampard, I feel like there's been yeah, I know. Under Lampard, I feel like there's been so much more positivity, particularly around young players playing in the squad more regularly, and of course pretty good results as well. And under Lampard, so it hasn't really featured as part of the story, has it? But it is still there.
Yeah, it's because of the youth, and it's because it's Lampard. Lampard can get away with doing things that Sarri couldn't because he's Lampard.
Fascinating.
And also because he's using academy players, which is what fans have been desperate to see for years. But in answer to the recruitment question this summer, I think central midfield is maybe the only position that Chelsea wouldn't be looking for a player, because they've got so many options there, and potentially more coming back off loan if you want to incorporate someone like Conor Gallagher or Ethan Ampadu. Billy Gilmore, he's suddenly catapulted himself into this conversation.
Yeah, right.
They are looking for a left back. We know that. They've looked clearly at Ben Chilwell. The one issue with that is that Leicester are good enough and rich enough that they don't have to sell anyone, and if they do, it will be at their price on their terms.
Yeah, which we saw with Maguire.
Exactly, and if you're Chelsea, I think they could have a big budget this transfer window, but do you want to spend 60-70 million of that on a left back?
The interesting thing with the Maguire deal, sorry to interrupt, I was going to add to the point by saying that one of the sticking points for United over Maguire was that Leicester wanted all of the money up front, which is quite unusual nowadays in terms of how transfer payments are usually paid in tranches. I think that might be one of the things potentially that is a problem for Chilwell and Chelsea as well. That's spending an awful lot of money in one go might hamper what they're able to do elsewhere, right?
Yeah, it certainly takes away some of that flexibility. And when you have alternative left back targets, a lot of people have talked about Alex Telles at Porto, and they've been linked to Alexandra in the past. I think that deal is dead, but there are options in Europe that could potentially be significantly cheaper than Chilwell and offer a similar level of production. So I think they will go for a left back one way or the other, but whether or not that is Chilwell depends on, I think, a number of different factors. They are looking, I think, for a centre back. I personally think they should go for an all-world dominant centre-back. If there's any notion that Koulibaly is available, I think they should go for him, because
he seems like such a Chelsea player to me.
Well, they've got so many centre-backs at the moment who are good, but I think they're number twos. They're not number ones. They're not leaders of a defence. And that's kind of what Liverpool had as well when they had Matip and Gomez. They had guys who were good at doing their own jobs, but not necessarily good at collectively organising. And I think someone like Koulibaly could really transform the complexion of what has been a very shaky Chelsea backline this season. So they are looking for a centre back. I think a left-sided centre back has been a priority for them as well. And of course, there's the question at the other end of the pitch of a striker. You know, how good is Tammy Abraham? Is he on a Harry Kane trajectory? Is he going to be slightly short of that? In which case, maybe you do want a first choice striker, or at least another really good striker to come in and compete with him.
What do you think?
I still haven't made my mind up, really. I think Abraham has already surprised me this season with how good he's been, because not so much in terms of his goal scoring, because he scored goals at every level of his career, but his all-round game, his link-up play, his hold-up play. I think training day-to-day with Olivier Giroud has really helped him. He's been a sponge, really, at Cobham in terms of learning from Giroud. Morris and Edwards and Lampard have done great work with him since pre-season in rounding out his game, and now he looks like he could develop into the kind of all-round number 9 that a top club needs. And he's not been as clinical as you would like, but he's still super young, and Chelsea have recent evidence in the career of Didier Drogba to show that a player who comes in and is not a prolific finisher can become one over time. That is, composure is something you can work on, and so I think Abraham remains a really intriguing project. But unfortunately, the injury that he had slowed some of his momentum before everything got shut down.
We've got to sort of, 45 minutes in this, and I haven't asked you about Frank Lampard yet. This is one of my final 2 questions. It probably should have been the first one. Again, to caveat, the season is currently on hold. We don't know what's happening, but Lampard has sort of matched expectations, exceeded expectations. How do you feel about his first season in charge? Are you surprised, or were you expecting this to be the case?
I think he's done well. I did predict pre-season that Chelsea would get 4th, partly because I expected Arsenal and Manchester United to be a total mess behind them. I wasn't expecting Tottenham to struggle as much as they've done.
You didn't think Leicester would be 3rd, right? No.
Yeah, exactly. No one saw Leicester coming again. But Lampard's done well. I mean, every time you ask him, he says he would have preferred to have had the summer transfer window. Obviously, that makes total sense, but it's worked for him in many ways, because it helped him temper expectations when he walked through the door. It also made it easier for him to justify to the people above him at Chelsea going in the direction he wanted to go in anyway, which was to play these young guys. You know, if you've got the transfer market, if you've got the temptation of going out and spending 50-60 million on a seasoned international, it's that much more difficult to say, no, I want Mason Mount to be my starting number 10. I want Tammy Abraham to be my starting striker. Because they didn't have those external options, they had they were able to go youth without really feeling guilty, or without people at Chelsea looking at Lampard and going, well, if this doesn't work, you know, you're on the hook for it. And it also meant that when adversity did arrive this season, as it was always going to, he was able to point to both of those things, and not being able to sign players, having such a young team, as well as selling Hazard, you know. So he's been able to use that and to his advantage at different points. It is also worth noting that Chelsea still added £100 million worth of players last summer, even though they couldn't buy. They signed 2 very good players in Mateo Kovacic and Christian Pulisic. Pulisic, I think, showed some really good flashes before he got injured, and I think he's shown enough to suggest that he's going to be a long-term building block as well. So Lampard has generally, I think, been on par in terms of his overall performance, but in terms of the way he's done it, I think the fans have really enjoyed it. They've enjoyed seeing all these young players come through. It's been heartening for the academy to see their work finally vindicated at a first team level. The club feels more connected than it's ever felt, and I think it's put Chelsea in a stronger position going forward, because now they've got an established core, which may not be, only time will tell if they're, you know, class of 92 good, but at the very least you have a homegrown core that can maybe give you some sort of identity going forward, where from 2012 to 2019, Chelsea's identity was basically give the ball to Hazard.
Right.
So this is maybe the genesis of something a little bit more substantial.
Liam, what is Frank Lampard's role in recruitment now?
Well, funny you should mention that, Seb, because we actually have a big piece on Chelsea's recruitment going up on The Athletic soon. But just to give you a little bit of a kind of sneak peek, I mean, Lampard does have a bigger role, a bigger say than recent managers. Maybe any Chelsea manager since Mourinho the second time. He will have a big input in terms of both the player he wants and also telling the club, no, I don't necessarily want this player because we've got this guy coming out of the academy or coming into the first team who's doing really well, and I don't want to block his development. So he's got that kind of sway, I think, because of who he is, but also because he's a very talented communicator and political navigator. He's very good at managing up as well as down. He's been able to put himself in that position where he can have a little bit more influence. Now, it will always be a process that Marina Granovskaya heads up. She is the deal maker in chief. Everyone reports into her. She has ultimate responsibility for getting deals over the line. And Scott McLaughlin, the head of international scouting, he's essentially head of recruitment. He will feed into Granovskaya and he will bring targets to the table that then, Lampard will have his say on. Petr Cech also has a seat at the table, although as far as I understand it, he's not a major voice. He will give his opinion. So it will always be a discussion, but then it will be Granovskaya's responsibility fundamentally as to whether a deal gets done or not.
So is going forward, does that mean that the position that Michael Amanalo used to fill, does that no longer really exist at the club?
It doesn't, no. There's been a restructuring, and I think Granovskaya has absorbed some of the powers that Emanalo had. Cech has the closest job title to what Emanalo had. So Emanalo was technical director, Cech is technical and performance advisor. But the way his role has been explained to me is that, unlike Emanalo, he does not have any departments of the club reporting to him. He does not have his own network of agents. He's not, managing his own relationships outside. No one who is looking to move to Chelsea deals with Cech. They deal with Granovskaya. So his job is more internal in terms of talking to everyone at the club, making sure everyone's pulling in the same direction and communicating with each other, and then he feeds into Granovskaya. He reports to her.
Is the idea over time for him to for that role to evolve and him to grow in status within the club?
Yeah, so Chelsea haven't been, they don't necessarily want to be tied down to saying that Cech is like a technical director in waiting, No. But I think it's a more fluid process than that. I think they're letting him feel his way into the role, and I think they're going to let it be a natural process over time of finding out what his exact skill set is and where it is best served. What role best serves his skill set, essentially. So if that becomes like a technical director, sporting director role, great. If that becomes something else that's a little bit more internally focused, then that would be great as well. They wanted him involved because he's a very intelligent guy, intellectually and emotionally, in terms of managing relationships and suggesting kind of best practice on different departments. And they want to see where his role goes from there, but they're not necessarily going to pigeonhole his ladder into one particular thing.
That's interesting. Can I ask you one final question, Liam, which would be, what are your expectations for next season? I mean, we know, as you mentioned already, that Lampard has had this sort of this interesting first year as a result of the transfer ban, as a result of Hazard leaving, and as a result of him being Frank Lampard. The expectations have been sort of tempered a little bit, which is an unusual thing for a club of the status of Chelsea, who I think have been expected to at least challenge for the title almost every season for the last 10, 15 years. Is that going to be the case again next year, or do you think that these sort of tempered expectations will continue, and that the supporters and the top of the club are on board with this as a transitional and growing process?
Yeah, so I think we have to preface this by saying that we still don't know whether Chelsea are going to be a Champions League club next year, and that determines, I think, a lot of the way that they look at next season. But I think there will be an element of welcome to Chelsea for Lampard, going into his second full season in charge. There will be an element of, this is the real job now. This is the full pressure of this job. This is everything that it can throw at you, with the transfer market, with the proper undiluted expectations, and that will be a big test for him as a young coach. But Chelsea as a club, I think, will be looking maybe not necessarily to win the Premier League title next year, because there is such a big gulf in terms of points over the last 2 years between Liverpool, Manchester City and the rest. They have raised the bar to an unprecedented level, and Chelsea recognise that as much as everyone else. But at the same time, I think there is a real optimism about the young group that they have and what they can do to add to it. And I think there's a feeling around the club that over the next 2 to 3 years, they can build something very special, and that they can bridge that gap. So I don't think they're necessarily looking to bridge it next season, but I think there will be an expectation of progress, and maybe getting a little bit closer, and maybe not being in the conversation of hanging on to fourth for dear life, and maybe looking up rather than over your shoulder in that conversation.
Hey Liam, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate that. And
it's a pleasure to be here.
I will tell people in the intro and in the mid-roll to go and check out your writing on The Athletic, which is fantastic and really worth reading. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll speak to you again in the future when the football has begun again.
Oh man, yeah.
Wouldn't that be something?
Feel free to edit out my stumbles and waffle.
No, I'm going to leave them all in. Yeah. Even that bit in the middle where someone came into your house with the intercom. Yeah. Super. Right. Brilliant. Thanks so much. And we will be back next week with another episode, something similar, but I don't know what it is yet. Cheers. Bye.